Thanks for being here today, and thanks. I was getting nervous you guys were going to do the thing where you let the guy go up there and flounder for a few minutes, so appreciate that. That was nice of you. And thank you to Commissioner Simonton for kicking off day 2. We've had a lot of good discussions, and I know I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists today. And as we've heard this week, the United States definitely leads the globe in 5G, thanks to substantial investment made by the wireless industry to improve spectrum utilization, enhance service quality, and lower deployment costs. And this includes $30 billion in 2023 alone, as Americans use more than 100 trillion megabytes of data. This is the largest year-over-year increase that we've seen in history. And these efforts have yielded a variety of innovations and growth in new products, services, and business models, all of which benefit American consumers and U.S. enterprises as the wireless industry adds $825 billion in GDP annually and nearly 4.5 million jobs to the American economy. But now I think the question is, how can we continue to build on this progress? The focus has turned to the implementation of the National Spectrum Strategy, as stakeholders are looking for new spectrum to power our economy and keep the U.S. as global leaders. And as we think about the band studies that are going on, and different frameworks to bring spectrum to market, we should consider the current landscape. As a recent report by pioneering Wi-Fi engineer and internet policy expert Richard Bennett explained, additional unlicensed allocations are necessary for the foreseeable future, as there are more effective ways to improve Wi-Fi performance. And along with spectrum, other tools like Open RAN and grant programs like the NTIA's Innovation Fund are being used to drive 5G deployment. So with that, we'll discuss some of these policy priorities that are essential to further investment and expansion in our 5G wireless ecosystem. And before we dive in, I was going to introduce this esteemed panel. So sitting next to me is Hank Hultquist, Vice President of Federal Regulatory from AT&T. We have Sarah Skaluba, Special Policy Advisor, the Telecom Policy and Innovation Fund from NTIA. Glenn Reynolds is the VP of Government Affairs, North America and Head of DC Office for Nokia. Rebecca Thompson, the VP of Government Affairs from UScellular. Phil Murphy, the Assistant Director, Spectrum and Telecom Policy for the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. And all the way over on the other side of the stage is Svetlana, the Director of Public Policy for Dish Network. So kicking things off, Hank, I'm going to look to you. Can you describe some of the network advancements that AT&T is seeing on both the mobile and fixed wireless markets, and how does that influence how you think about these public policy priorities?
Thank you, Christian, and thanks for having me here today. I think obviously one of the great success stories of 5G has been in the area of fixed wireless. Has really opened up new avenues of competition, very well received by customers. So I think that's a great success story. I think in some ways the most obvious, though, is that the 5G deployments in mid-band spectrum that we've seen have really been critical to the U.S. keeping up with demand for customers for mobile data. And the other thing I would highlight is it's really opened up possibilities in really new kinds of use cases that we've seen. And in particular, I would highlight a couple kind of what I would describe in the disability and health area. So AT&T, we did the collaboration with Gallaudet University, which I think many people know they have deaf students. And we did this collaboration with them to develop what we call the 5G helmet. And it's a football helmet that enables the football coach to really communicate in a visual display to players on the field what play they would like them to run. And it's really fabulous. I wish I had brought the helmet with me so you could see it. And another one we've done similarly is what we call the connected cane. And so it brings 5G capabilities to a mobility assist device that it includes both texting, the ability, phone capabilities, and really allows someone who's has mobility challenges living at home to be able to ensure that they can have connectivity to their healthcare provider, family members, should they experience a fall. I mean, it's really a great example of how you can bring wireless into these other kinds of devices to improve their functionality, and really, it's really a great thing for customers who have those kind of mobility issues.
That's amazing. I also wish you brought the football helmet. I've been trying to try it out for a while now, but they're both amazing examples. Rebecca, turn into you. I think we heard a little bit from Slayton and LT yesterday about sort of the regional players and how they're a key piece of getting service to local communities that might be otherwise pretty tricky to serve. So, what kind of uses and innovations are you all seeing to enable consumers and industries in some of those harder to reach parts of the country?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me here. And for those of you who is expecting Adriana, I just play her on a panel. But thank you for allowing us to swap out. Yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, actually listening to Commissioner Symington, spectral efficiency is really important. So there's a lot of different ways that we could increase the efficacy of our network. Spectrum certainly is one. Another one is using the technology that's there and the improvements that are there, like sector splitting, so allowing more usage on the tower. The other thing is, of course, building more macro towers, but that is cost prohibitive, especially in a rural area. So, I think one of the things that when you think about spectrum policy, what you have to think about, especially in regional areas, is not just how it's going to be used, but how you're going to access it, how regional carriers are going to get access to it. So, smaller license sizes are always beneficial, and thankfully the FCC in the past couple auctions have done that. It's allowed UScellular to participate, but at the same time, it means often that we are relegated to the less attractive bands, like 700 megahertz A block, for example. You get sort of pushed out by the larger providers, and so we have to think kind of more holistically about the better ways to use the spectrum.
Thank you. And if we say spectrum 5 times, we then have to talk about the national spectrum strategy. So Phil, looking to you, would you share an update about how the administration is thinking about the national spectrum strategy and maybe where the focus is these days?
Yeah, of course. First off, I think the biggest piece here is to recognize that President Biden and Vice President Harris view spectrum as a critical national resource and one that is essential to our nation's economic competitiveness, but also our ability to lead internationally on issues around innovation, competition, and connectivity. And it's something that I think increasingly is an area where we feel the need that we have to compete. We have to continue to win. On the strategy itself, I think today we actually released the Spectrum R&D plan, which is part of the National Spectrum Strategy. So this is a forward-looking document that lays out kind of the objectives for where the administration believes we have to go in terms of what are those research and development objectives? How do we not just think about what we're doing now, but how do we both manage spectrum in a way that meets our long-term needs, is more innovative, is more efficient, but also how do we innovate on that underlying technology? How do we make better use of this resource? Because we're not making any more of it. I think that's a big part, is thinking not just about where we are now, but where we need to get in the future. And I think part of that is also around the band studies themselves. So, work has been underway since November of last year when we launched the strategy. We've been working on our implementation plan. We've been meeting those objectives, but work is, I think, for folks that are engaged in this process, there are these 2 large band studies we're going to talk about more, but around the lower 3 gigahertz and the 7 and 8 gigahertz band, where we see a lot of opportunity. And I think the focus is making the most of those studies so that in 2 years when those studies are done, hopefully we'll have results that enable us to repurpose some of that spectrum for commercial use and meet, I think, what we see as this really deep need in the commercial sector for additional spectrum opportunities.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that has definitely come through the last couple of days, is that need for more opportunities. So I appreciate hearing that. Svetlana, I think we're going to maybe take a little bit of a different look here. I know that you all at DISH are in the middle of sort of a nationwide build out and kind of talking about why, how 5G networks are coming together with Open RAN principles. Love to hear your thoughts on how Open RAN and network virtualization could enable innovation with those wireless networks.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me here today. So at EchoStar, which is the parent company of DISH, we are really proud to have deployed the world's first and the nation's first and largest standalone 5G Open RAN cloud-native network. Today, our network has more than 20,000 towers deployed, covering more than 250 million Americans. And the network is certified by major cell device manufacturers, Apple, Samsung, and Motorola, which really speaks to the robustness and the performance capability of the network. We deployed this network under 3 years during a global pandemic, which is impressive and something we're really proud of. And when we were looking to figure out how to build our network and design our network, we wanted to build a network that was more resilient, that wouldn't be subject to a single point of failure, that was more secure, that was going to be cost effective, quick to deploy, and that was going to be upgradable over time, because we wanted our network to be able to be modern and keep up with the rapid pace of innovation. And that is why we chose to design our network with cloud native Open RAN architecture. And the way that it really is forward looking and supports innovation is in 2 ways. First, to be able to service any part of our network and the stack, we are able to choose among different vendors, right? And we don't rely on one vendor. We can choose from different parts, different vendors to service, for example, a radio. And competition drives innovation. We can choose the best of breed technology. And secondly, as many new technologies, look what all the developments happening with AI right now, right, are coming to the market, we can upgrade our network much quicker than because of the cloud native Open RAN architecture. So, and the pace of development with AI is so quick right now, and so we can really take advantage of those developments much more quickly given the architecture of the network.
Thank you so much. I mean, it is amazing what 5G and some of these new network technologies have really unlocked and are looking to unlock in the next few years. Glenn, I know that you sit in a little bit different perspective here as a manufacturer. So, I know private and enterprise networks have become sort of an important 5G use case for you all and for the industry, and provide a way to provide secure and customizable connectivity. What type of innovations are you seeing and are you facilitating in this space?
Yeah, first thing I wanted to acknowledge Phil's comment about the R&D strategy getting out. Alan mentioned yesterday that it would be coming soon, and I guess he was serious. So Nokia sits in a fairly unique position in its ability to be an innovator and a leader in technology across the communications sector. We are a leader in fiber optical networking equipment. We obviously serve the mobile wireless, fixed wireless. We are in the process of working with AST in developing a leading edge satellite direct to handset technology. And I guess I'd be a little remiss if I didn't throw out the fact that by the end of the year, working with NASA, we're going to be starting to deploy the first cellular network on the moon. And I kind of mention all that because a lot of this innovation really comes together when we're talking about the enterprise market. Because the enterprise market, the demands and the unique requirements with respect to security, with respect to the various types of quality services that they need are really where we can bring together innovative solutions. And private 5G networks in particular is a game changer in that respect, because it really does allow us working with our partners to meet those specific needs. So we've been working in the areas of shipping ports and mines, educational facilities. Even just earlier this week, we announced jointly with one of our partners, NTT Data, that we're going to develop a private network based solution for the city of Brownsville, Texas, that will really make it a leader in smart cities throughout the continent. But I'll take a little bit of a detour here and get away from that part, because it's really kind of focus on some of the policy aspects of this, because I think it really underscores the importance of permissionless innovation and the need for us as technologists, the engineers, to be able to meet the needs of our end users. This is a point that we actually emphasized in the course of the FCC's net neutrality proceeding, when we started having a big debate about the importance of 5G network slicing. And one of the things we really emphasized in that discussion is that carriers need to be able to, carriers and other service providers really need to be able to innovate and differentiate in order to meet those needs, because that's where the demand's going to come. And you create that demand, and then you create the incentive to invest. And that's where we really need, is to create those opportunities to invest, to monetize these investments. And in that context, it's interesting. I just saw last week that the chairwoman, in connection with I guess it is a new proceeding for very low power devices in the 6 gigahertz band, made a comment about how important it is to allow for entities to innovate without permission, and how Wi-Fi in particular allows that. Well, totally agree with that concept, but we need to keep in mind that same premise applies throughout the ecosystem. We need to allow carriers, we need to allow manufacturers to figure out how to solve problems, and not create a regulatory regime that enables that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I would say that in listening to kind of all the innovation and the discussion of innovation, I think it sounds like we're in our innovation era. And as a veteran of a Taylor Swift concert, I feel pretty at home with that. Sarah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how NTIA is looking at sort of this innovation and these efforts around enabling 5G networks, and maybe if there's any parallels around the national security landscape.
Sure. So thank you, Christian, and thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. I will use this opportunity to talk about our Innovation Fund rather than Taylor Swift. As many of you know, our Innovation Fund was first authorized over 3 years ago, really with an aim to accelerate wireless innovation, drive competition, and strengthen our supply chain. We receive funding via CHIPS and Science Act in 2022, and really since then, NTIA has not looked back. To date, we've made 17 awards under our first round of funding to drive testing and evaluation of Open RAN networks, totaling more than $140 million. I'm excited to share that we have closed our second round of funding under NOFO 2, which is really focused on driving open radio unit innovation and commercialization. The team is hard at work reviewing applications, and we are looking at November to announce our first commercialization awards. And then we are targeting our innovation awards by the end of the year. So all in all, that's more than $560 million dedicated to driving open and interoperable networks, which is a serious investment. As many of you know and probably participated in, we also had our second listening session last month to really talk about some of the use cases for Open RAN networks, think through what are ongoing challenges that need to be addressed, and really what outcomes industry and stakeholders would like to see from the fund. And that has set us up for a thoughtful and strategic third funding opportunity, which, as you heard from Assistant Secretary Davidson yesterday, we are targeting early 2025. So we are moving full steam ahead. I'm also excited to share that as of yesterday, we established our Federal Advisory Committee. So stay tuned over the next couple of months for a Federal Register notice to solicit membership on that front as well. All right, those are the big highlights.
Oh, that's great. No, I mean, listen, let's
go
break
with
some news. That sounds great. I do want to kind of turn and talk about how, Spectrum's impact on the 5G, Spectrum policy's impact on the 5G ecosystem. And I kind of mentioned some numbers from CTIA's annual survey, but Svetlana, just curious your thoughts on, that demand that we've seen skyrocketing and how that, shapes, how that growing demand shapes Spectrum policy.
Sure, thank you. So one of the things in the annual survey that I noticed was highlighted was the growing demand for fixed wireless service, and specifically 5G home broadband. And from the EchoStar perspective, we think as part of one of the policies that can be adopted to help meet that growing demand is an action that the FCC could actually take today by updating the rules for the lower 12 gigahertz band, that's 12.2 to 12.7, to make that band available and these are 20-year-old rules, so updating old rules to make the band available for two-way, high-powered fixed wireless service. And this is something that the commission can do today without even the need for spectrum authority, which we think that, giving the commission spectrum authority is critical, but they don't have to wait for that. They can act today on that. And this comes at a critical time because, states are starting to dole out funds for BEAD. They're starting to establish their pools of pre-qualified providers to participate in that, and obviously fixed broadband is one of the solutions that's part of the different approaches for solving the gaps in broadband under BEAD. And so we really hope to see the FCC to take up this proceeding and to help meet the growing demand for fixed wireless service.
Thank you. And so Hank, turning to you, and let's talk a little bit about the National Spectrum Strategy. I know as we talk about that, they're looking at kind of different spectrum models, whether it's sharing or other frameworks. But traditionally, I think when we think about spectrum, you think band segmentation and full power licensed spectrum kind of being the driver of innovation and sort of the foundation. Can you kind of talk to us about the service provider's ability to support customers and enterprises in the use cases across the country, and talk about maybe like power levels and other types of issues that might impact those access models, and how you all think about those kind of things?
Sure, thanks, Christian. I guess what I would say is, mobile broadband has become this really ubiquitous, really important service to Americans. And the provision of mobile broadband depends on the availability of adequate spectrum to support it that can be deployed at power levels high enough to provide macro area coverage. I mean, there's no rocket science in that. That's just a fact of physics. And on an ongoing basis, we look out and we look at our current spectrum holdings, and I'm sure the other companies do as well. And we can see that within kind of our planning timeline, unless more spectrum becomes available, it's going to be difficult to, in a foreseeable amount of time, we will need to deploy more spectrum at those power levels that are adequate to support macro cellular networks in order to continue to provide that great mobile broadband service to Americans. It's really pretty straightforward, frankly.
Yeah. And I think we've heard sort of, looking kind of into the cupboard and seeing maybe a limited, if not any.
Yeah, if you were here yesterday, there was a lot of discussion about the National Spectrum Strategy and the band studies. And boy, if there was one phrase I heard a lot, it's all hard. There's nothing easy out there. And so I think that's, okay, so we have to roll up our sleeves. We have to think creatively. We have to find ways to get spectrum and use it. And I guess along those lines, I would say, the FCC has a proceeding going on where they're looking at making some changes to the CBRS band, potentially to make that band more useful. And we certainly would encourage that with any band. But I think we're going to take the opportunity in that proceeding, and we did today publish a blog saying, when you're thinking about the band, the 3 gigahertz band, maybe we should think a little bigger, and maybe we should be thinking about really today, the way the 3 gigahertz band exists, we've kind of got this situation where you've got high power services from 345 to 355, high power services from 3.7 to 3.98, but then you've got the CBRS in the middle. And we're not the first parties to say, hey, maybe there's a better way to do this, where we could move the CBRS services, the low power services, down below those high power services, lower in the 3 gigahertz band, and then create a new high power band in between. And then potentially you would have high power services today all the way from 345 to 398, and possibly in the future there could be expansion on both sides of that, which I think would then put us in a situation where in the US, the 3 gigahertz band would really be the home of 5G and possibly into the future 6G. So, I think that this is a way to, as you're thinking about the band studies, to think about the ultimate configuration of this band doesn't have to be the same as it is today.
Yeah, understood. And I know that I've heard several times people, mentioning being creative around thinking about some of these difficult problems. So I know that you all are obviously thinking at this, in different ways. And Phil, I was wondering maybe you could talk about kind of the you touched on it a little bit, but talking about those study plans being led by the executive branch. and in particular, maybe the lower 3 gigahertz and the 7-8 gigahertz studies. Those have been kind of a focus of probably everybody up on stage, but those are the ones that everyone seems to be, focused on.
Yeah, well, first I would say I appreciate that Hank heard the message that this is hard and it's complicated. I think, I used to work in Congress and then at NTIA, and I think one of the things that I appreciated coming into the government was a deeper understanding of what the federal government is really using the spectrum for, and those key missions that it's leveraging spectrum to accomplish, and how it's not just thinking about spectrum as a strategic resource now, but in the future. And when we think about these advanced applications like weather prediction, obviously that's so critical today for folks in Florida, but for national security, national defense, and so many other things, increasingly what we're seeing on the federal side is that the government isn't just thinking, and these federal agencies aren't just thinking about a capability that they have that they want to maintain, but capabilities they're looking to develop and expand upon. And so oftentimes when we're doing these studies, and we're talking to the agencies, we're not just talking about a zero-sum game with them, because they're not just thinking about how do I replace this system that exists in a band with a similar system. They're sort of like, well, we have plans for how we could expand this capability in the future, how we could deploy new capability. And so one of the real challenges that the administration has been working through is really working with these federal agencies to think about what that forward-looking plan for the future is, where these new systems could go, and how both commercial and federal users can kind of leverage this resource for the betterment of the country as a whole. And so when we think about the lower 3 gigahertz plans that are happening right now, that principally is a band that's used by the Department of Defense, but there's many other federal agencies that use it too. And I think the real focus there is thinking about that top 150 megahertz of the band, right, which is sort of used in many countries around the globe for 5G service. How do we share that band in a way where there might be, and this is the case I think for most bands that have been leveraged for commercial use that were previously federal bands. But there's usually these ongoing sharing constructs that occur mostly in places that aren't really appealing for commercial use, where the government may have a long-term interest. Usually it's around test ranges or military bases where it's difficult to kind of migrate those systems. But oftentimes you can, if you move 1 or 2 systems around, you can make the band available throughout the rest of the country, and particularly in key areas so that you have like these real population centers that get access to this spectrum. And I think that work has been ongoing. I think the hope right now is, or the plan, is to launch those studies in November, and for that really work to begin in earnest with a target completion date in 2 years. And so we've been working really hand in glove with each of the federal agencies that are operating both in that lower 3 gigahertz band and in the 7-8 gigahertz band, and trying to figure out with them what are those uses and capabilities that they are really dependent on now. How are they thinking about leveraging that spectrum in the future? And how can we help them get to that future capability that they're thinking about, potentially sooner, right? How can we accelerate that process and create a real value proposition for those federal agencies and honestly for the American people, because we all depend on these capabilities, right, for our own safety and security. And so the hope is that that process will enable us to make spectrum available for commercial use, and we'll be able to do it in a way that meets that timeline that Hank has been talking about, so that when the commercial sector is really ready for another round of spectrum auctions, there will be spectrum available.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know it's a ton of work and I know it's hard, but it does sound like you guys are really pushing forward on it, and it's good to hear that for sure. One thing I'm not sure that we've touched on quite yet is talking about unlicensed spectrum and where that kind of fits into all of these efforts, whether it's through the National Spectrum Strategy or other efforts. And maybe I'll turn to someone, Angie. Glenn, maybe you could take a crack at this one. How should policymakers think about more unlicensed spectrum and whether or not or when to allocate it into the marketplace?
Well, I'm tempted at some level to just adopt in whole Commissioner Symington's comments earlier this morning, because we heard a little bit of this yesterday. Obviously, all of the different uses of spectrum are needed, right? And we got to figure out a plan. And I know From my previous role at NTIA, I appreciate how hard this is, and I appreciate how far how much effort it took to bring the agencies and the industry together and sit down at the same table and figure out a plan forward. But having said that, one of the things we took away from yesterday, one, we are operating in a global economy, in a global technology marketplace. And we need to be making sure that not only that we are making decisions in that context, but that we are a leader. The U.S. is a leader in that, in driving the right policy and right technical decisions going forward for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is our own national security interests. And then we got to keep in mind, that from a vendor perspective, it takes a long time to get there. From research to standardization to manufacturing to network deployment is a long process. And so we need to be making sure that we are getting guidance and certainty early in the process so that we can begin that conversation, and that we as technologists, not me, my company, I never claimed to be a technologist, are able to focus our energies in the right locations. And I think a little bit of what we heard yesterday is that we've painted ourselves in a bit of a box where without a whole lot of margin for error. That I understand the importance of doing the studies in the mid-band, both the lower 3 and the 7/8, and those are going to be important, and Nokia is absolutely fully participating in those efforts. But at the end of the day, we better come away with a plan that identifies actual mid-band spectrum that can be utilized and for commercial wireless, and a plan for how we're going to repurpose that spectrum for commercial wireless. Because if 2 years from now we finish these studies and we don't have a plan forward, we as a country will have really risked losing our ability to lead the global technical world for the next decade. And so, let's keep moving forward, let's keep on working, but it's imperative that at the end of the day we've got a path forward.
Thank you. Hank, Rebecca, Svetlana, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on terms of unlicensed and how that plays a role when we're thinking about kind of future spectrum.
I guess I would just say that Glenn kind of said it and implied, and it's pretty clear that today we have what I would describe as an imbalance in mid-band, where we have a lot of spectrum that's been opened up to unlicensed and maybe not as much as the rest of the world for a licensed use. And so my immediate reaction would be to say, well, let's restore a little more balance here. The second one I would think is more theoretical for policymakers. Obviously, one of the goals of spectrum policy is to drive the resource to its most highly valued uses. And, policymakers, I would say, should have in mind kind of, a model for how they assess how to value uses like unlicensed, because, there's not going to be an auction. You're really deciding, yes, we should allocate more spectrum to this. So I think they should have an approach that allows them to evaluate when that is necessary and what uses it will serve. And I'm not saying what the right answer is. I'm just saying they should have some sort of mental model that they apply to that issue.
And I think from my perspective, I'm very glad to hear that things are moving along, hopefully as fast as possible with the national spectrum strategy. I completely agree with what Hank said on unlicensed. I think the other factor that we need to be clear about, at least from a regional carrier perspective, is how we're defining mid-band, which is the spectrum that's most needed right now. Svetlana brought up the 12 gigahertz band. For us, that is, to deploy in 12 gigahertz it's uneconomical. So trying to keep the focus on 3 and 7 and how to move forward there is really critical.
Yeah, and I'm going to stick with you, Rebecca, because I think you have this perspective of the regional carriers. But can you talk about like full powered licensed spectrum and why that plays such an important role for you all in terms of deploying out to your consumers?
Yeah, I mean it's pure engineering. High power spectrum helps us serve harder to reach areas more effectively. I don't necessarily think that UScellular has cornered the market on that per se. UScellular's in 21 states. We represent our coverage is about 41% rural of the population, and so the type of spectrum and how we utilize it is incredibly important. And so, but that's not just true for UScellular, that's true for all the other carriers on the panel. And so I think finding ways for us to, I think echo what I said earlier, use it more efficiently and allocate appropriately mid-band spectrum is going to be important.
One thing, maybe changing gears just a little bit, one thing that I think in listening to the panel with the Capitol Hill folks was interesting is talking about when they're thinking about new spectrum bills, and then they would get calls from generals or DoD. And Phil and Sarah, maybe you could talk about how you all have to work with DoD and trying to figure out a pathway forward. I don't know who wants to go first, but if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure. I feel like this has been a part of my life for the last couple of years. I think the interesting thing to do when you're talking to any federal agency about their spectrum use is to understand really fundamentally what they're trying to achieve with it. And I think to acknowledge how important their mission is, right? And I think fundamentally the challenge with federal agencies is, for them, they're not always thinking about how I could be more efficient, potentially. They're thinking about the capability, right? And they're concerned about losing a capability that's really important to them to achieving that mission. So for the Department of Defense, they're thinking about keeping us safe. They're thinking about advancing US values abroad and protecting our allies and partners. And so I think the most important thing when you're talking with them is to acknowledge how important that mission is and how every part of the government, and particularly the White House, is focused on that mission as well. And I think the important lesson I've learned is to really communicate to them that we agree with you, but we think we can do both, right? We think that we can keep Americans safe, maintain the lethality and effectiveness of the US fighting forces and our allies, and we can also make spectrum available. And I think the thing that I've noticed is, and this came through a lot when we were working with John Sherman, who's now the former CIO, Chief Information Officer at DoD. We would do these meetings on the Hill, and I think a lot of times, John would say with, Assistant Secretary Davidson, we're in the same business, right? We are about keeping Americans safe, and a big part of that isn't just about military systems. It's about economic competitiveness and economic security. And the Department of Defense realizes that in order for the US to compete globally, we have to innovate at home. And a big piece of that is our ability to develop and deploy advanced telecommunication services and our ability to leverage that for innovation and for economic activity. And they get that. And I think they recognize that they need to do more to make spectrum available to help facilitate that goal. And I think that's why they have come to the table and really said, we want to work with you on the lower 3 gigahertz. We want to work with you on the 7 and 8 gigahertz bands. We want to find a way forward because we agree that this is really essential, not just for them in protecting their own equities and capabilities, but for the country and our economic success and our ability to not just develop this technology, but to be a global leader in it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And maybe for the industry panelists, I'd love to hear sort of the other side of that coin. Whether you've done it before or how you're thinking about it looking forward. Are there any things in particular that would make sort of working with DoD and figuring out a pathway forward to do both of the things that Phil had laid out? Love to hear some thoughts on that.
We could spend the rest of the day.
Just sit back and relax.
Look, we've had a lot of recent experience working with DoD because we acquired licenses in the 3.45 gigahertz band that we share with DoD. And we've had, I would say, a very extensive coordination with them, which has not yet yielded the level of success we hope that it will ultimately yield. Look, they, as Phil said, they have a different mission than we do. So I'm not going to say it's, that the way they approach these things is wrong, but they're difficult to work with. You have to really dedicate resources, and every now and then you also have to try to find other allies to help you resolve problems. And I doubt it'll ever be easy, but we're just, this is what we have to do, is continue to work with them and to try to find ways to more effectively jointly use the spectrum so that we're not interfering with their mission, but when they're not using the spectrum, we have access to it.
I was just going to say, from our perspective, obviously being collaborative partners is really important. An interesting area for exploring innovative spectrum sharing solutions with DoD, we think, could be in the area of Open RAN and the RIC, the Radio Intelligence Center, and exploring potential opportunities for a partnership there between industry and DoD. And in general, our experience more broadly has been pretty positive working with DoD on the piloting private 5G Open RAN solutions on military bases. We have 2 pilots with them, one at Whidbey Island, one in Hawaii, and we're really eager to see DoD scale the adoption of that at other military bases.
Yeah, and I think just from our perspective and our experience, transparency is key. And it's good to hear that you've learned a lot about how they're using the spectrum. We don't always know. And so just like Hank's company, we are also trying to negotiate and coordinate with them. It's a good news, bad news story for us, actually. We've been successful with the help of NTIA and the FCC to try to help relieve some of the encumbrances that are there. But there's still a lot of areas where, there's supposed to be coordination and it's not, it's being excluded. And so that needs to be, transparent up front, and hopefully we don't always have to continue to escalate to try to get solutions.
Yeah, no, thank you. I know that I've heard that word transparency a few times when we're talking about this, so always good to reemphasize that. Again, switching gears a little bit, Sarah, I know that you had mentioned that innovation fund and that $1.5 billion. I don't know if you could talk to us a little bit more about how that promotes national security, enables economic outcomes, just generally supports that 5G innovation that I think we've all been talking about today.
Sure, thank you. So we're trying to be very thoughtful and strategic. Obviously, $1.5 billion, it's a lot of money, but when you look at the cost of commercially deploying this technology, it's not actually a ton. And so we've tried to work very closely with industry. As you all know, we had a request for comment that really kicked off our NOFOs, NOFO 1 and NOFO 2. We've had 2 listening sessions, and really informing every step of this process is our aim really to address the key technical challenges related to Open RAN adoption, and then also some of the key market challenges. So for NOFO 1, you saw us investing in testing and evaluation, which NTIA views as foundational to Open RAN adoption. For our second NOFO, you saw us getting at the supply chain really with the open radio unit focus, and then really thinking through, okay, how can we invest in these open RUs so that they can compete with incumbent technologies or surpass them, and then also so that they're cost effective given the market. For our third NOFO, I think I can say it will be software focused. We can't speak more beyond that for NOFO 3, but I do think it tells a good story. And that the requirements and rules we're baking into these funding opportunities are trying to strike a balance when it comes to working with US and foreign companies, where our place of performance is, and then how we're requiring partnerships between certain entities as well.
Thank you so much. And I know that we're running a little short on time, so maybe one last lightning question. If you all could do a short, 3-word answer on what you see as the main thing that will drive us forward over the next few years. Hank, you're next to me, so I'm starting with you.
2 words, hard work.
I have to say Open RAN.
I actually think the U.S. needs to up its game in the support of R&D, and I know that we invested a lot of money in the Wireless Innovation Fund and in chips, But the other side of the CHIPS and Science Act, the science part, was a great commitment to R&D that could have supported, still can continue to support U.S. leadership in these technologies, but it hasn't been funded. And we really need to get that support, because we're competing with companies where the country is basically funding all of the R&D. And that not only gives them an advantage in the development of the R&D, but it also flows down, because then those companies don't have to recover those R&D costs when they're selling their equipment around the globe. And it makes it impossible to compete based on price in those parts of the world.
I guess this is basically a recap of what I've already said, but more spectrum, greater investment in infrastructure. So grateful to NTIA for all you've done on that so far, and then regional carriers are struggling. You heard a lot about that yesterday. So support for the Universal Service Program that has been hugely beneficial for UScellular.
I think. It's been I think the course up here, but implementation of the National Spectrum Strategy, right? It is going to be that foundational effort, I think, by the government to meet the commercial sector's needs, over the long run. And I think, the important thing about that document is that it is a living document, right? It is designed and intended to be updated and renewed and refreshed as we go forward. And we do think about it in many respects as a framework for how we make spectrum available in terms of a best practice going forward, and doing it in collaboration with both the commercial sector, trying to achieve that transparency that folks want as much as possible, and in deep partnership and collaboration with federal agencies.
I would double down on Sarah's point about Open RAN, but also additionally adding from the EchoStar perspective that we think it would be really important and helpful for the FCC to update its spectrum screen rules to support a minimum of 4 national carriers instead of 3. There was a public notice that was issued a year ago, and we think that this is really ripe for the FCC to issue an NPRM to further examine this.
Thank you all for the discussion today and for joining me in my 5G innovation era. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.